I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're listening to the only story that matters. Even with the countless other podcasts out there, all of them competing for your attention, there is absolutely nothing else like SKALD. I've been doing it every week for more than a year and a half, recording every episode in one single flawless take. But don't worry about going back to start at the beginning. Instead, just jump right in here with this episode, the very best episode yet. Once you've reached its thrilling conclusion, you can then go back to check out the episodes you've missed, or pick up one of the reasonably priced prose volumes available exclusively on Amazon. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 87. The seal had been broken. She awoke with a gasp and a clenching of fists. The seal had been broken. The glyphs had been disturbed, and the wards, those that had been there for almost as long as she had, those that had been built into the walls of Ravenna shortly after the city's founding, the wards had been set off. They rang an alarm bell in her head, a bleeding, clanging cacophony that echoed inside of her skull, a dissonant clamor that dragged her from her blissful, unaware, forgotten slumbers. She took a moment. She needed one. She needed far more than just a moment, because she had been sleeping. She had slept. She had slumbered for so very long. Longer than she knew, longer than she had hoped, longer than can be conceived by the minds of mortal men. She had been there at Ravenna's founding. By many accounts, by the city's founding myth, by its rumors, by its legends, by the only accounts that matter, that truly matter, she herself had founded the city. She, as a tiny girl, as a forgotten, discarded waif, as an orphan, abandoned by her tribe as just another mouth to feed, she had wandered into that then uninhabited dell, had fallen to her knees in that grassy clearing, had, without family, without tribe, without hope, had collapsed upon the ground and wept. A dirty child, clothed in rags, weeping, alone in the forest. She shouldn't have lasted long. She shouldn't have lasted the night. She should have been set upon and devoured by any of the beasts, both animal and human, that inhabited that forest. But she was not. Whether by luck or by the intervention of some unknowable force, some inconceivable power, she was protected, she was shielded, was allowed to simply sit and weep in peace, in safety. Abandoned, with no options, with no choices, with no knowledge of how to survive on her own, with no means to provide for herself, she simply sat and she wept endlessly, day after day, night after night. She didn't stop to eat because there was nothing to eat, and she didn't stop to sleep because there was still so much weeping to do, so much sorrow, so much bottomless sadness for her to explore. She didn't remember how long she sat there. She didn't like thinking back upon those days, upon her earliest days, when she was still weak and frail, when she was still human. But however long she sat, however long she wept, over time, her sadness, her sorrow, her misery became transformative. She wept. She cried. She wailed until her throat went sore and then hoarse and then raw and then silent. But though she did not make a sound, her plaintive cries did not go unheard. Perhaps it was the same unknowable force that had sustained her, the same inconceivable power that had shielded her. But whatever it was, it took pity. It looked upon this poor, forgotten girl, as forgotten then as she had, in more recent millennia, become once again. It looked upon her, and it had mercy. The girl was touched. She was elevated. She was transformed, and so too was her body, was her soul, was her very lifeblood, were her tears. So as they fell from her eyes, hot, heavy, never-ending, as they fell down upon the ground, the salt within those mournful droplets took root and grew. It expanded. It summoned up properties and possibilities from deep within that very soil. And slowly, over the course of years, of decades, of what should have been multiple lifetimes of that young girl, a city, the city, Ravenna, grew up around her. Springing forth from the girl's very tears, Ravenna's walls sprouted up from the earth, summoned into existence to protect that sad, mournful, weeping girl, the forgotten girl, the founder and patron saint of Ravenna. The process took generations, tens of hundreds of years, but throughout it all, the forgotten girl stayed young. She stayed vibrant and healthy because her sadness, her sorrow, her misery, it had been sublimated. Her pure expression of those most human qualities, of the misery of solitude, of the fear of abandonment, they had elevated her. They had raised her up. They had transformed her. She had been turned into something else. She had undergone an apotheosis, and she had become something greater, something both more real and less. People were drawn to her, were drawn to her city, pulled to Ravenna from throughout that border realm. The city called to those that had nowhere else to go, who had been abandoned, who had been left for dead. It was at the lowest point of the dell, that verdant valley, and thus it was where all those who had no other place to go eventually drifted. Her sadness, her misery, her sorrow, they had been the foundation upon which Ravenna was built. They had summoned forth the walls behind which man, woman, and child could find shelter from the storm, from the terrifying border realm that threatened to devour them. And as time went on, as more and more terrified souls swept into Ravenna, the city grew. It throbbed and it pulsed, and it became the chaotic, ever-shifting metropolis that she now found it. But though the forgotten girl had been forgotten once again, though her story, her suffering, her sacrifice were forgotten in all but children's songs and rhymes, she was still there. She still lurked, not inside the city, not even beneath the city, but within it. Ravana had been birthed from her tears, and even now, she remained a part of it. She was a part of those filthy streets, of those winding sewers, of the pristine towers, and of course, of those massive, impregnable walls, those that her tears had created and had imbued with ancient, primal magics that not even she, after millennia, after eons of thought and meditation, magics that not even she could comprehend or understand. But what she did know of those magics, of those wards, of those deadly glyphs, is that they would only be activated when the city, when her city, was in its greatest peril, when it was confronted with a threat that not even those cyclopean, tireless walls could match. So when she, the forgotten girl, the true lady of Ravana, awoke to those alarms, she did so in shock, and though she hated to admit it, in fear. Though time had been kind to her, as it is to all those who have arisen, who have undergone apotheosis, she was not ageless. She aged slowly, yes, but she had been there in the city of her making, lurking within its very walls for millennia, for eons, and thus time had taken its toll. She was no longer merely the forgotten girl. She was a woman of full age, and now she was ready. No, she was eager to remind those that had awakened her, to remind them exactly who she was. She rose, but she didn't rise. Not exactly. Rather, she took form. She pulled her essence, previously distributed throughout those walls, the central, original walls of Ravana. She summoned her very being back to herself, and she built herself. She created herself as all those who have truly risen, who have truly undergone the apotheosis must. She created herself, and she looked upon her creation and was very much pleased. Her limbs were long and powerful, beautiful and elegant, but not in a way meant for looking, meant for gazing upon. No, they were stunning in their utilitarian aspect, her muscles rippling beneath her skin, clothed in light, supple suede that hung loosely from her form, the better to allow her a full range of movement. Taking pleasure in her body, as all those who have arisen, who have truly arisen, must. She stretched and she flexed her muscles, pleased at their strength, pleased at the power they issued as a promise to all those who could look upon them, and then, fully pleased, fully satisfied, she began to dance, spinning and twirling, her long braided hair whipping around her, growing longer and longer as she spun, as her undeniable gravity pulled the rest of her scattered essence, of her dispersed being into her person. Her muscles grew and they strengthened, her hair grew and it lengthened, and with her form finalized, with her body perfected, with an appearance worthy of the demigod she had become, the demigod she had made herself into, the demigod that nature, that time, that circumstances had required. She willed herself back into being, back into the real world, into Ravena's world, into the world of shadows and smoke that mortal men tell themselves, reassure themselves, promise themselves, beg themselves to believe is all there is to creation. The forgotten woman, the true lady of Ravenna, awakened by her wards, she danced herself into being, and she was horrified by what she found. A centaur horde. They surrounded her. They were everywhere. For as far as even she, with her preternatural sight, with her otherworldly vision, for as far as she, a demigod, could possibly see, they were an unruly, convulsing mass, armed with simple sticks, clubs, bows, and spears. But those were not what had awoken her. Those were not what had disturbed her glyphs, had disturbed her slumbers, her well-earned rest. No, what had awakened her were the centaur's hooves. They pounded upon the earth in an irresistible rhythm, a beat that summoned forth the destruction that sat at the core of the natural world. It was the throbbing, twisting beat of a field, of a forest, of the savage wildness that had once threatened to destroy her, to devour her, to gobble her up whole so very long ago. After so many years, after so many decades, centuries, millennia, and eons, the wilds had returned to claim what was theirs, to claim that which she had taken from them, to destroy the form that she had imposed upon the formless, to wipe her creation, Ravenna, from the face of the earth. She could not remember the last time that she had defended her city, the last time that she had needed to defend her city. But that didn't matter. She could not even comprehend the size of the horde that faced her. She couldn't imagine the truculent savagery that they embodied. But that did not matter. She did not know who, if anyone inside that city was even worthy of saving, was worthy of her patronage. But that did not matter either. The only thing that mattered was that the city of Ravenna, her city, was under attack, was under assault, was besieged, and she, the Lady of Ravenna, the true Lady of Ravenna, refused to let it fall. So, as those slack-jawed centaurs stared at her, as those simple oafs looked at her in amazement, as they gazed up at the stunningly beautiful woman that towered over them, that looked scowling down at them, burning their big green eyes with her disdain, she knew that she didn't have long. An individual might be shocked for minutes, an army for moments, but a horde would give into its destructive impulses much sooner, because a horde was mindless. A horde had no brain. A horde was driven not by sense, but by lust, by an all-consuming desire for destruction. And since she knew time was of the essence, since she knew that she had only an instant to act, once again, she began to dance. Twirling on one foot, hopping to the other, spinning and twisting, turning and leaping, she danced before the walls of Ravenna, before the walls of her city. At first, she stayed in place. At first, she stood directly in front of those gargantuan walls, a type of strange, menacing performance for the horde. But as they began to regain their senses, as she saw them once again lift club and lift spear and lift bow, she spun into the air once again. But this time, she moved forward. She barreled into the horde, twisting and spinning, pulling those hapless equine monstrosities into her orbit, into the spinning eye of the storm, into the blur of fists of feet, and most importantly, her long, twisting braids. The centaurs were slapped. They were kicked. They were pulled in and shoved out, battered by the colossal, heavily muscled, utilitarian limbs of that dancing demigod. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it came when those braids, those ever-lengthening braids, those that seemed to spring forth anew from her head as she sang and spun, the worst of it came when her braids collided with the centaurs. Because those braids weren't merely braids. They were braids, but they were also something else, as was everything about that dancing demigod, the forgotten woman, the Lady of Ravenna. They were braids, but at their ends, woven into her long, unruly, curly hair, were gleaming razors that thirsted for nothing more than thick, red blood. And their thirst, it was soon sated. The razors, the braids, the dancing demigod herself, they were soon drowning in blood, drowning in the thick red life stuff of the centaurs, the blood that, when it hit the ground, when it fell to the earth, did not stain the dirt, but rather called up grasses and wildflowers, though they were soon trampled down by the falling bulk of dead and dying centaurs, and the feet of that demigod, which now pounded out a rhythm of her choosing, a rhythm of creation, a rhythm of defense, a rhythm of safety. And that rhythm continued and intensified. It was fueled by the centaurs' blood and by their twitching deaths. The death howls of the centaurs threatened to drown it out, but soon they too were subsumed into that irresistible rhythm, the rhythm that enchanted the horde, that charmed them, that summoned them forward into the spinning eye of the storm, that commanded them forward into the inky black void of nothingness. That rhythm continued, and it intensified, driving the dancing demigod, the forgotten woman, the Lady of Ravenna, to dance faster and harder, harder and faster, her hair growing and strengthening and whipping around her at ever-increasing speeds. That rhythm continued and intensified. It grew louder and louder, so loud that it reached up over the Cyclopean walls, and it spoke to the citizens of Ravenna. It consoled that frightened, terrified populace. It urged them forward. It called them to the tops of the walls, where they looked down upon their forgotten founder, their forgotten Messiah, and they cheered, they sang, and they chanted her name, chanted her true name, the name that had gone forgotten by all, including her, but that still existed within the soul of Ravenna, within the soul of her city, and now made itself known upon the lips of her devotees, those that had forgotten they even were her devotees, and were even now blasted into forgetfulness by the radiant power of that simple moniker, too beautiful for human ears to both hear and remember. Her dance continued. The cheers continued. The fight continued for she knew not how long. Because what was an hour, a day, a week, a year to one such as her? It was nothing. It was the blink of an eye, but a blink that she enjoyed, that she loved. She savored every moment of that fight, of the defense of her city. She delighted in the breaking of the centaur's siege. She thrilled to think about that horde breaking upon her like a rock in the horse beast's frothing oceans. The battle was not yet won. Ravenna was not yet safe. The horde was endless, but it didn't matter. None of it mattered, because she, the dancing demigod, the forgotten woman, the lady, the true lady of Ravenna, she was tireless. She was indefatigable. And she would dance until the ground was too full to accept any more of the life force that ran through the centaur's veins. She would dance until the blood pooled upon the ground, until the city, until her city, until Ravenna was surrounded and defended by a moat of that thick, syrupy blood. She danced endlessly, pounding her feet down upon the ground time and time again, and eventually it was too much for that already weakened earth, for the ground enfeebled by the centaur stampede, by the hymn of destruction that their hooves beat into the earth, the one driven by those insufferable drums at the back of the centaur's endless horde. Though her dance was one of creation, of protection, of safety, it still proved to be too much for the earth, for the ground at her feet, and as she danced, it began to crumble beneath her. But what difference did it make? What difference did it make to one such as her? Most of her dance, the parts of her dance that mattered, that truly mattered, they took place in the air. They took place as she spun through the skies, whipping her braids behind her. It took no effort to choose her footfalls more carefully, to choose to leap and land upon those sections of the earth that had not yet fallen away. And as she did so, she laughed, because she saw upon the faces of the centaurs an expression, a feeling, an emotion that their race had worked hard to breed out of themselves. Complete, unhinged fear. She watched them fall all around her. Watch them taken by her swinging, whirling braids. Watch them battered to the ground by her clubbing blows. And increasingly, watch them plummet down into the darkness below, howling out for mercy, for clemency, for any death but the one that awaited them down below. She laughed, because they were her foes. They meant to destroy the city, her city, Ravenna. But when she herself looked down, when she gazed down past her feet to see what could possibly elicit such terror in a race as foolishly brave and noble as those savage centaurs, she gasped, stumbled, and nearly followed them down into the darkness. Because what she saw there, what she saw tearing up through the earth, slicing through rock and stone and root and flesh, its way lit by gleaming steel, its presence announced by the grinding of gears and the clanking of metal upon metal, a deadly rhythm of progress that was joined by the squealing of centaurs, by the soft crunch of flesh and of bone. What she saw was a terror, was an abomination, a gleaming, spinning maelstrom of polished steel. It was a storm of creation, but it was a creation that not even she could defend. It was something brought into the world in violation of all that was good and all that was natural, all that was worth defending. It was a cataclysmaton. Thanks for listening to this, the very best episode of SKALD yet. Every week, I ask you to go leave the show a good review on iTunes, as it is the absolute best way to help spread the word about this, your favorite podcast. And every week, I read one of those reviews here on the show as a way of giving a little mini shout out to those of you who take the time to leave one. 2112 Syrinx 73 says, SKALD rules all the realms. This is the only review of SKALD that matters. SKALD is a brilliant weekly performance of an original tale of the one true king of men, the one true king of flames and ashes, by the one true king of sword and sorcery podcasting, Aubrey Sitterson. If you like brutal, gripping, thrilling stories of heroes and villains in the style of Conan or Red Sonja, then this is the series for you. Download and listen now, and soon you'll find yourself with a wicked, rictus grin spreading wide across your face. I love doing SKALD, and I love seeing how much it's connecting with people. But a man cannot survive on effusive praise alone. That's why it's so important that if you love SKALD as much as I do, if you want to keep it around forever, even as my paid writing work continues to increase, you have to go to patreon.com/skald today. I'm not asking for you to pay for this show. This show is absolutely free, and it always will be. What I'm asking is for a small token of your appreciation, a token of your faith in this project and my unique approach to it. Head to patreon.com/skald to pledge a small monthly donation to the only story that matters. For more information on me, the SKALD prose volumes, my comic book writing, signed copies of my work, my wrestling talk show Straight Shoot, bio, contact information, and more, head to aubreysitterson.com. And make sure to come find me on social media. I'm Aubrey Sitterson on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Snapchat. Tag me in all your SKALD praise so I can shamelessly share it. Finally, my weekly recommendation. I heartily endorse the newest album from Khemmis, spelled Khemmis. It's called Hunted. It's doom metal, but much more heavy than it is hard, with aching melodies and lyrics. If you dig Pallbearer, you are going to love this. It's available on Spotify and makes great background music when you're getting work done. Once again, that's Hunted by Khemmis, spelled Khemmis. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.